Google Deepmind, the UK-headquartered artificial intelligence branch of the internet giant, recently went back on a pledge not to develop AI for weapons use. And last week, the corporation told its unhappy staff it was proud to have signed a contract with the Pentagon, allowing its technology to be used in classified military operations. That was an extension of an existing $200 million contract, which allowed the military to use Google AI tools in some domains. Under the new terms, the military can now use Google AI for, quote, any lawful government purpose, with Google surrendering all rights to veto its use in classified operations that the military say fall under that description. Employees of the company were, unsurprisingly, not very happy about it. In an open letter to bosses, they wrote this in response to the deal. We want to see AI benefit humanity, not to see it being used in inhumane or extremely harmful ways. This includes lethal autonomous weapons and mass surveillance, but extends beyond. The only way to guarantee that Google does not become associated with such harms is to reject any classified workloads. Otherwise, such uses may occur without our knowledge or the power to stop them. The carve-out that Google employees were asking for is similar to the one that competitor AI firm Anthropic insisted on when discussing contracts with the Pentagon earlier this year. As a result of their stand, Anthropic has been shunned by the US Department of War, who have turned to other companies such as OpenAI and Google Deepmind. Now, this is not the first time Google workers have been at odds with their employer over defense contracts. In 2017, Google signed up to run for Project Maven for the Pentagon. This was an initiative to integrate AI into military functions like target selection, surveillance, and intelligence gathering. But workers protested and organized against the contract, with Google withdrawing from the deal in 2018 as a result. With Google out of the picture, tech giant Palantir swooped in to grab the contract, valued at around $160 million a year. Project Maven has recently been implicated in the US's illegal war in Iran, with questions raised about Palantir's role in producing the system, which identified a girls' school as a target. Over 150 civilians were killed in that strike, including 120 school children. So working with the Pentagon should be seen as a reputational risk for big tech. However, the incentives in the other direction are also strong. The Pentagon last month requested $54 billion to fund its Defense Autonomous Warfare Group. And with Google and the other major AI companies spending tens of billions each year on data centers, that's money that they want to get their hands on. So is there anything that could stop AI firms getting further into bed with the military-industrial complex? Well, in the UK, Google Deepmind workers are attempting to unionize, in opposition to their work being put into US military hands. After voting to unionize in April, UK workers wrote to Google bosses on Tuesday, demanding that they recognize the Communication Workers Union and unite the union as joint representatives of the around 1,000 Deepmind employees. They'll have 10 days to agree voluntarily recognition or begin negotiations, after which a legal process will begin. The CWU's National Officer for Tech Workers, John Chadfield, said this. This is a really important moment where tech workers at Google's Frontier AI lab are connecting with some of the most oppressed people in communities around the world in meaningful ways, based on foundational values of solidarity and trade unionism. By exercising their rights to collectivize, they are in a strong position to demand their employers stop circling the ethical drain of military-industrial contracts, echoing the sentiments of many working people in the UK and elsewhere. Now, for obvious reasons, Deepmind workers involved in the unionization are very cautious about talking to the press on the record. But Michael Walker has spoken with one of those involved in the action, under conditions of very strict anonymity. To that end, our editor Stephen Methven has voiced their lines in the following audio interview, in which Michael began by asking them to explain what kinds of uses they feared their work being put to.
Recently, there was this big controversy between Anthropic and the Pentagon, where they refused to allow for lawful use of surveillance and autonomous weapons with the AI, and thus surveillance of American citizens domestically as well as internationally. And this led the Pentagon to labeling them a supply chain risk and retracting from this, and a lot of backlash. Google just signed a contract with the Pentagon allowing lawful use of autonomous weapons and surveillance. So I think this is one of the most frightening things to have occurred. And given that there's no restriction in the language, you can very much imagine that this is how it might be used.
And what do you hope the unionization drive could achieve if you are successful at unionizing?
We would hope for, in the maximalist case, that we would be able to change the terms and conditions for these contracts to always rule out those types of applications, as well as providing ways to automatically monitor for these types of applications happening. Because I guess one of the problems with confidential use cases is it's deployed in a specific server that no one can have access to apart from potentially just that military organization. And at that point, you're just letting it into the wild, right? And especially if you've removed guardrails. But even if you have guardrails, guardrails could be circumvented. Jailbreaking happens all the time with large language models. So even guardrails aren't necessarily enough. A lot of us believe you need monitoring and you need it in the contractual agreement, and you need to be able to pull that if that contractual agreement is broken.
And what's your analysis of why Google have been willing to sort of go further than Anthropic and say, yes, we are willing to sort of hand over this product for you to use for, quote unquote, any legal purposes? Presumably that's comes with a big risk in terms of their reputation if they're shown to be the bad guys compared to one of their main competitors.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think things are deeper. There's deeper political ties, I think, between Google Alphabet and the US government. We know that there's been historic anti-monopoly cases against Google. And I think there's probably a real fear that if they don't collaborate as necessary, this is a card that the Trump government can play at any time. And then I think there's the personal political ties between shareholders / co-founders and the Trump government, which is publicly known.
And Google, obviously headquartered in the United States, Deepmind headquartered in the UK. Which of those workforces, I suppose, is the most significant here?
It depends what you mean by significant. But in terms of contributions to the core technologies that would be used by the Pentagon, would very much say it's America. It's where the majority of employees lie. But the UK is not an insignificant part of that picture. Given one, the roots plus the size of the office plus the headquarters. And the other thing is that this technology isn't, you can't fragment this technology, right? You can't split up the UK model and the US model and say, we'll give them just this chunk of the model. And we'll keep this chunk for military applications and this chunk for general customers. It's all tied into the same model and used and distributed throughout all of Google.
And what impression do you get about, I suppose, as to how Google might respond to a unionization drive? I assume they're not a particularly union-friendly employer.
No, they're definitely not. There was a unionization drive in Google UK recently with a very small job family, and they responded, as is typically the case, where there was some union busting that was done. It wasn't maybe as severe as, say, TikTok's response was in London, where they fired, I think, like 400 people. But yeah, we're not necessarily expecting a nice response. But I think Deepmind is a bit different to Google. It is a part of it, but it's a separate kind of research lab and has a completely different set of leadership who are mostly scientists, have been scientists all their lives, very dedicated to the research. And so I think we really have no idea what to expect from the response.
We talked about so far the potential for military uses of Google AI, and that seems to be sort of one of the drivers of this current unionization drive. Many other issues that people discuss a lot about AI because it seems it could be transformative. So I suppose automation of jobs being one of them. I mean, to what extent are you guys worried that you're automating your own jobs and that you might have some leverage now, but soon you'll just be replaceable by the models that you yourselves have created?
Exactly. So I think there's definitely some of us, a bit of a hierarchy in terms of issues that we're trying to grasp with. And we very much care about a big swathe of issues, including climate as one of them, automation of our roles as well as other people's roles. But what feels most pressing is a kind of, the preservation of human life and human rights. And this is one of the reasons, automation is one of the reasons why it feels very timely that we need to act now, because we don't know in a few years' time we're going to even have the collective bargaining power to act. We could be automated out of our own roles by then. And at that point, there is no collective bargaining power. So whilst we still have it, we need to act.
In terms of, I suppose, protecting life, lots of very prominent people suggesting that not only could AI be used sort of by militaries for nefarious ends, but it could itself end up having fairly apocalyptic outcomes, either because we lose control of it or because of some kind of misuse. How are the workforce at Google Deepmind sort of relating to this conversation? It must be quite odd sort of going to work every day when there is quite a large group of esteemed people saying that this business could literally end human life on the earth. I mean, I don't know what you think about that. Maybe you think it's far-fetched, but how is that being talked about within Deepmind?
This is kind of the existential risk camp. There's kind of two categories of people, and I guess three when they fall in between. But there's the existential risk and the kind of accumulative incremental risk. And I'm very much in the incremental risk category. I think that if you completely ignore all societal problems, aiming for a solution for the one at the very end of the journey, then by the time you get there, there'll be no society left. and you need to solve the societal problems as they arise. And we need proof that we can solve these problems as they arrive in order to gain trust that the very same people, government, society are also going to be around to solve the even bigger problems down the line.
I mean, that suggests that you're not worried that the sort of big existential, apocalyptic scenario is going to happen in the next sort of few months or years. You think we have got some time to work that one out?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And I don't know if that will ever happen. I think it's one of these low probability catastrophic events. You need to always prepare for catastrophic events. That's why we prepare for, hurricanes hitting various parts of the world where they've never necessarily hit before. But you still can't ignore the rest of the way the weather works. That might not be catastrophic, but could still cause damage to society.
That was an anonymous Google Deepmind worker speaking to Michael Walker earlier. Now, in response to the workers' demands, Google have said this. Google UK recently received a letter from Unite and the Communication Workers Union requesting recognition for Google DeepMind UK employees. We have always valued constructive dialogue with employees and will remain focused on creating a positive and successful workplace. Didn't seem necessarily like a call to recognise the union there, but I will wait and see. Dahlia, on a broader question though, this shows that workers' collective bargaining power will always be at the forefront of the fight to ensure morality in terms of business practice, insofar as it doesn't matter what your business is, it doesn't matter what you do. If you want to put your business towards unethical ends, you have to rely on your workers' desire and their motivation to do that for you. And so any amount of collective action as far as a union is concerned can be put to use to stop that. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about tech worker organizing is because of the ways in which technology is particularly AI technology is being rolled out in a way that is, I would basically, we have developed a technology whose capacity for destruction is rivaled maybe only by the atomic bomb. It's huge. And so within that context, a tech worker union is not just about bread and butter issues. It's not wage disputes. It's not just kind of contract disputes or conditions disputes, although it does involve that, and that's obviously important. But it also is about sort of our collective kind of future, because when you have this technology that has this incredible capacity for damage, and there are no guardrails, the government, either the government regulation is unable to keep up with technological developments, or the government is complicit and an active agent in the malicious use of these technologies, or you have companies, as was mentioned in that interview, this kind of Silicon Valley philosophy of like move fast and break things. So like even if there are regulations, even if there are rules, you just break them and you deal with the consequences later, you pay the fines or whatever. And so within this system, this very fast moving development, there are very few checks and balances. And one of the only checks and balances that we still have is worker power. And I was very alarmed to hear in that interview that amongst people who are involved in making technology, because one thing that tech workers, as political agents, it's they have authority. So one of the ways in which a lot of us get bamboozled by these technological conversations is a lot of us don't really understand how it works. So when you have the people who are making these technologies saying certain things, it does carry an authority. And when they said, we need to use worker power while we still have it, because there's a good chance that a lot of us are going to be automated out of our job, or at least made de-skilled to the point where we actually can't express leverage in the way that we could at another point. That's really, really alarming, because at the moment, workers, having a political consciousness, workers being unionized is kind of one of the only points of friction in the rollout of these technologies. And it's been a long road, because I have some friends who are very effective tech worker organizers who are themselves tech workers, and they've spoken about how it's been quite difficult for a while to get tech workers to unionize, because a lot of them are quite well paid. A lot of them have, So they wouldn't think of themselves as workers that necessarily need to be unionized. And there's also a kind of culture of thinking that, as tech workers, we sort of sit outside of politics and, we just look for efficient and effective solutions to problems. And one thing that I've been hearing from my tech worker friends is that Palestine has actually been a real turning point where seeing the technologies that you develop being used to conduct a genocide has made a lot of tech workers realize that they are political agents. And this idea that they sit outside of politics is completely flawed, and that actually they don't want their names and their labor to be appropriated in this way. So we are seeing a kind of a movement of political consciousness amongst tech workers. And it's sad to hear that time could be running out on whether or not that's effective. But it's also worth thinking about how, though a lot of these technologies also rely on us as consumers of these technological products. In many ways, we're all tech workers because we all generate the data that make these technologies usable. And so there's also something for us to be doing, maybe not in terms of consumer boycotts, because one thing that's so effective about a company like Google is that it embeds itself so much in our everyday life that it's almost impossible to make an individual choice to not use it. But things like campaigning to make sure that your local government does not implement some of these technologies in your local services. This is why things like getting Palantir out of the NHS, campaigns like this are really, really important. So yes, the tech workers are a really important part of this story of resistance, but there's also something for us to do here, because ultimately it's our data and it's our information that makes these technologies so powerful and so usable. And particularly when it comes to a company like Google, I mean, Google is a very powerful actor here. It's not a matter of if we don't do it, some other company will. Google is as if not more powerful than most national governments. It is the gatekeeper of information and data across the entire world. And so if something changes in Google with this one company, if guardrails are put in with Google, then that really does impact what is possible when it comes to the exploitation of these technologies for warfare, policing, surveillance, etc.
Certainly true. Certainly true. Well, thank you very much, Darling, for joining me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to go vote now.
Oh, good. Oh, yes, of course.
Exciting.
Indeed. It is indeed local elections in this area of the country. Not where I'm from, unfortunately. I have not had the joy of voting today, unfortunately. I thank you, everyone at home, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for a bumper show from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.